I'm holding two copies of what seems like the same game, but what if I told you one of these copies is worth hundreds of dollars more than the other? Could you tell at a passing glance which one is which? Well, I'm going to show you. Retro video game collecting has been at an all-time high in popularity over the last few years, and it's not hard to see why. It's an amazing hobby and an even better community to be a part of. And if you're like me, you not only love collecting, but you get a dose of tinglies sent straight to your nostalgic G-spot every single time you unearth some old relic from your childhood that you then get to bring home to your current collection. There's just no other high like it on the planet. And one of the best parts about the community is that everybody has their favorite thing they love to collect for. And for me, it's the Nintendo 64, without a doubt. It has been ever since I opened one up on Christmas Day 1996. I love those things, and I still chase anything N64 related down to the ends of the planet to this day, and probably will till the day I die. Now, from the beginning, I have only been interested in collecting stuff for the Nintendo 64 that I could have actually personally went out and rented or bought and brought home as a kid and played. All the international stuff, as cool as it is, we're not going to look into it for the sake of this video. But over the years of collecting for the N64, I have personally learned how complicated it can be, and there's a lot more to it than the relatively low game count of 296 North American released titles may lead you to believe, and these are the 5 reasons to help prove my point as to why I feel that way. Okay, so you may be asking yourself, what's a variant? And that's a fair question, but luckily it's a pretty easy concept to grab a hold of. A variant is simply something that already existed that had a small change made to it, like a controller with a special finish, or a game that needed a bug fix that was re-released later. And I've got a pretty good example of that one. So, I'm holding 2 copies of what seems like the same game, but what if I told you one of these copies is worth hundreds of dollars more than the other? Could you tell at a passing glance which one is which? Well, I'm going to show you which one the rare variant is. So 2 copies of No Mercy, but why is one worth hundreds more than the other? Well, here's the trick. If we look at the left one, we will notice that the code ends in the letters USA. And then on the right one, we'll notice that the code ends with USA followed by a little dash and the number 1. And that's the trick. That's what you're looking for to know that this is the one worth so much more money. And why is it worth so much more? It was a bug fix. The original copy had a memory issue, so you could send this copy in and it would be replaced with this one that had the memory issue fixed. That's why everyone's looking for this one and why it's worth hundreds more than the other. Pretty interesting, right? Now at this point, I have learned about and ran into pretty much every cool N64 variant out there, and here's one of my favorites. It's just the yellow Nintendo 64 controller. And for whatever reason, the yellow controller was kind of considered a bad luck omen in my friend group, so none of us ever wanted to get stuck with it. That is, at least until one of my friends ordered this out of a Nintendo Power magazine. The DK64 Banana Controller. At a glance, it's just the yellow controller with some flair. They've added the DK64 stamp, and then of course the handles are made to look like bananas, but at the end of the day, it's just a variant of the yellow controller, but it's super cool. You could also get a yellow banana sleeve to slip over the controller to kind of complete the look. It was awesome. And then later I found out that they also made a green one and a black one, but I never ran into those as a kid. But when you set them side by side, pretty clear, same thing, but this one is hundreds of dollars more than this one. But this is just one of many. Let's take a look at another one. Now, Nintendo Power had another super cool N64 controller variant, which they released for their 100th issue Nintendo Power Spectacular. In this case, all they did was take an existing N64 Gold controller and slap a fairly decent quality Nintendo Power 100 sticker across the top of it. That's a pretty small change, but a big enough one that made us collectors wet ourselves, and to this day, the values between these two items vary drastically. Now let's take a look at the legendary Millennium 2000 N64 controller. Also a product of Nintendo Power, but they only made 1,000 of these, and you actually had to win one to even get your hands on it. Now this is one super cool, unique bastard, but at the end of the day, it is still just a palette swap of the normal Nintendo 64 controllers that we all grew up with, which makes it a variant, but in this case, a super duper rare variant. I mean, look at this thing. It's got the black buttons, the super cool black back. You just didn't see anything like it, especially in North America around that time. And the fact that there was only 1,000 of them made it a collector's wet dream. And Nintendo really thought this one through. They didn't just slap a DK64 sticker onto a yellow controller in this case. They really put some love into it. And that is why, to this day, they command extremely high price tags. Now this is the Mac Daddy as far as rare variants go. This is the Nintendo 64 E3 Golden Controller, something on an entirely different level of rare. I mean, there's only 12 of these known to even exist in collectors' hands, and the only way to get one back in the day was to win the Star Fox 4-player competition on stage in 1997 at E3 in Atlanta. So, as cool as it is, and honestly I don't even know what these sell for, I've not seen any sold listings, but I'm guessing it's pretty astronomical and awesome, but I don't really count this as part of the North American controller set. So super cool is a rare variant, but I don't think you actually need to find one of these to complete a quote-unquote North American controller set. Super awesome, super rare, but that's about where it stays. Most of us will never even see one of these in person. Okay, so now that we have taken a baby step into the world of rare variant Nintendo 64 collecting, let's take a quick peek under the veil of the deepest, darkest, scariest collecting pit for the Nintendo 64 that I've ever had to drag myself out of. And that is, of course, the not for resale Nintendo 64 titles, or the NFR titles for short, or as my wife calls them, the don't you ever consider going down this collecting path again, or I will kick you out of my fucking house in a second. These are way too expensive and you won't sell them, so stop talking about it titles. So what is a not for resale title? Well, it's pretty simple. It is exactly what it sounds like. It was a variant of the game that was not sold at retail. It was sent to a store as a demo copy, maybe to a reviewer as a review copy, or sometimes even included as part of a pack-in with the system that included the game. It's hard to say, but since these were not readily available at retail, they've become extremely rare and sought after over the years, commanding extremely high price tags at this point, which makes them limited and extremely fun to chase. I think the quickest and easiest way for me to demonstrate exactly how insane price differences can be between a standard copy of something and a not-for-resale variant of something would be to show you Diddy Kong Racing. A standard copy of Diddy Kong Racing is currently valued at $23.90 USD, as to where the not-for-resale variant is an astronomical $912.50. Now, that is insane, especially when you realize the only difference is the fact that this one says not for resale on the front. That's it. Most of the time, the only real difference between the not-for-resale variant and the actual retail variant would be those big, beautiful not-for-resale demo game-only stickers across the back of the cards. But not all NFR titles still have those stickers for one reason or another. However, nearly all N64 NFR titles have the words not-for-resale clearly incorporated into the front label somewhere, so that's what to look for. Now, not-for-resale titles are not unique to the Nintendo 64. All systems have a few of those of their own, but the N64 does pack quite a few of these bastards, and they all have a pretty hefty price tag attached to them. Some much more than others, though. I can't possibly talk about all of them, so I'm going to pick out a couple of my favorite that I think demonstrates this point a little better than the rest, and we're going to dive into those right fast. Let's start with Zelda. The Legend of Zelda franchise had two titles released for it on the N64, Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, and both of these titles have a not-for-resale variant. But not just one, and that's what makes them unique compared to any other not-for-resale variant on the system. So both Zelda titles released for the N64 have what I would call a standard not-for-resale variant attached to it, which is just the retail version of the game with not-for-resale slabbed on the front label or with a sticker on the back of the cart. But this is where it gets interesting. Ocarina of Time also had a collector's edition special release, which also has a not-for-resale variant of itself. But this one's kind of unique because it is the only Nintendo 64 not-for-resale variant I know of that doesn't say it on the front. It is only identified by a not-for-resale demo game only sticker on the back. Extremely rare. I can only find pictures of it online. Probably will never see it in person. And again, just to demonstrate the differences in prices you can expect between the two versions, a gold standard copy of Majora's Mask goes anywhere from $40 to $70, as to where a not-for-resale gold version of Majora's Mask goes anywhere as high as $300 and up. It is absolutely staggering the extra money these things can put in your pocket when done right. And alas, even with all that said, I have actually yet to mention the true legend of the Legend of Zelda not-for-resale N64 cartridges, and that is, of course, the Majora's Mask Gray not-for-resale variant. This thing is off the Richter scale, rare, and truly, truly expensive. If you are lucky enough to even get a chance to buy one, you can expect to pay a second mortgage on your house to pull it off. But what's unique about this game is that it's a true demo cartridge. It is nothing like its retail brother. As you can see in the picture, it allows you to select different portions of the game to test out. It was probably sent to reviewers or retail stores so they can get an idea of what this game was going to be about, because it was, in and of itself, a pretty unique title for the time. But like I said, if you're lucky enough to even get a chance to buy one, expect to pay up. But they don't come up often, so if you do and you want one bad enough, you better jump on it. Now truly, I could talk all day about the not-for-resale Nintendo 64 titles, but I've got other topics in this video I want to get to, so I'm going to pick one more title out of the bunch, and then we're going to move on to the next thing. Now, everybody that grew up in the late 90s and early 2000s probably remembers playing Donkey Kong 64, but did you know that Donkey Kong 64 actually has an extremely rare not-for-resale variant that's worth a ton of money, and it's gray? Now, obviously, the biggest change between the not-for-resale DK64 cartridge and the retail version is cosmetics. Of course, this one's gray, and the one we all know and love is yellow, but surprisingly, there's actually a few gameplay differences between the two versions as well. I'm actually going to make a different video about that down the road, so keep an eye out. But like I said, the biggest difference is looks and, of course, price. Current market value has the standard Donkey Kong 64 sitting at $26.99 USD, while the gray not for resale variant is sitting at a ball-busting $1,740.53. Now, these prices and the enticing allure of how rare these things are the very reason I had to stop collecting them, because they kept getting me in trouble with my wifey.
Annie, what's wrong?
We got a problem. The car broke down and we need extra money.
I hate to hear that. I don't know how I could help.
Well, what's that in your hands?
Oh, these? Nothing much, just $7,300 worth of extremely sought-after, not-for-resale Nintendo 64 titles. These things are extraordinarily easy to flip, too. It's crazy. They're awesome.
Well, don't you think the answer to your problem's right in front of you, then?
Right in front of me? I don't know what you mean, unless you're talking about selling your body, and I mean, I guess you could if you wanted to.
No, you jackass. I mean, sell your damn games.
Oh! You insensitive.
I awoke several hours later in a daze, confused, lost. My chin hurt, my testicles were tender, but worst of all, my games were gone. I decided right then and there to stop suckling from the devil's teeth that was not for resale titles to save my marriage. Now, I couldn't possibly talk about all the awesome rare variants for the Nintendo 64 in this short segment, but I'm actually planning on dedicating an entire video to that very subject here in the near future, so keep an eye out for that. But for now, let's move on to the fourth reason why I think the Nintendo 64 collecting world is a lot more complicated than people give it credit for. So what's a Blockbuster exclusive? Well, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a game or movie that you had to get from Blockbuster. If you wanted to rent the game, you had to rent it from Blockbuster. If you wanted to buy the game, you had to buy it from Blockbuster, but only after they were done renting it to you as a pre-played item. And you may be asking yourself, well, why would that complicate collecting for the Nintendo 64? And I'm here to tell you, not all of us were blessed with pinpoint uterus accuracy at the time of birth. We didn't all pop out just down the road from a Blockbuster video, after all. If you were like me, you could go in any direction for 2 hours just to get to one of these things, which made finding any Blockbuster exclusive titles for the N64 in the wild pretty dang hard, especially when you realize there's not just 1, 2, or 3 of these things. There are a total of 8 Blockbuster exclusive titles released for the N64, and I'm going to give you a quick rundown of all of them so you know what you're up against. First up, let's look at International Track and Field 2000. This is a game I didn't get to play back when I was growing up, but I did play other track and field games on other systems back then, and to be honest, this is basically the same thing. It's got all the same sports and all the same fun factor, which isn't much. Honestly, the most exciting thing about this game was doing your best to come up with any way to make it fun while playing with a friend. Ha ha! Fuck you, Josh! I just shot put it out of you!
Yeah, well, no, you stick me with the crappy-ass controller every time. And also, this is the hammer throw, jackass.
Oh, yeah, well, you know, well, you, Josh! I just hammered throw the out of you! Yeah. Beyond that, though, there's really just not much to say about it. Unless you are really into the track and field type of game, you could probably take this one or leave it. But let's move on to the next one. Next up is Daikatana, or at least that's how I've always pronounced it anyway, and I heard about this one growing up, but it was because of John Romero's attachment to it. I had no idea it was on the N64 until way later, but when I learned that, I went out, I chased it, I found it, I bought it, and I brought it home to try to beat it, but I found out pretty quick that that wasn't going to happen, and the reason is because it sort of just kind of sucks all the balls, man. Like, even for the time, it just felt old and ugly and messy, and it just wasn't fun. Like, I had more fun at my vasectomy than I did trying to play this game. It was weird, but that's all I'm going to say for now. I may come back to this one some other time, but for now, let's move on to the next one. Next up is Razor Freestyle Scooter. Now, this is a game that I would have really enjoyed as a kid because I was a skateboarder. All my friends were skateboarders, but we had this one buddy who loved his scooter, and this would have been like a gift from God to him. Now, as you can see, it is shooting for a Tony Hawk Pro Skater feel, and that's kind of what it pulls off. It's not quite as good as Tony Hawk Pro Skater. It doesn't look as good, doesn't feel as good, but that's what they're shooting for, and they kind of hit it. It sort of plays enough like it that you get the point, and you can enjoy yourself sitting down just playing it here or there with your friends on a weekend or a sleepover. So, all in all, I don't hate this one. But I sure as hell can't say that about this one. Transformers Beast Wars Transmetals. I fucking hate this game, and I'm not sure why. It has all the makings of a game that I would normally like. It looks okay, it feels okay, but usually I just spend a few seconds picking my character and then spend a few minutes getting my ass handed to me on a silver platter, and then I lather, rinse, repeat. What's not to hate, right? But that's just my experience. Overall, it looks good. It plays okay. I'm just not a fan, man. And I don't think I'm alone in that. But really, that's all I have to say about it for now. So let's go to the next one. Now we've got Stunt Racer 64, another Blockbuster exclusive title that I honestly don't hate. It's a racing game, sure, but it's one that I actually play here or there, and actually me and my kids will sit down and play it from time to time. It's not terrible. Now, it is a racing game, but it's not the worst one on the system. It's definitely not the best, and it is called Stunt Racer, so you would maybe expect a little more variety in the stunts. You just got some flips and some spins here or there, so not a ton to work with there, but it's fun beyond that. It's mostly a collector's item at this point. It's pretty expensive, but if you ever get the chance to grab it, I would recommend it. Alrighty, here we go. Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine. Another just kick to the nuts Blockbuster exclusive that I was not a fan of. Now, this is a Blockbuster exclusive, but I also heard that you could buy this one directly from LucasArts back in the day, so that's kind of cool and makes this one sort of unique. But outside of that, I'm just not a fan. It plays like a broken, wannabe, watered-down Tomb Raider experience, and it's just a huge letdown all around. So let's just go ahead and move on to the next one. Now here's one you just can't go wrong with. NFL Blitz Special Edition. This is a Blockbuster exclusive that I honestly had no clue even existed until I stumbled across it a couple of years ago while shooting for my complete set. Now in all honesty, it's essentially just Blitz 2001 with an updated roster, but you have to have it to complete your set, and it's still pretty cool to know that there was a fourth Blitz game hiding on the N64 all this time. So if you're just wanting to play some Blitz, grab NFL Blitz 2001, but if you're shooting for the complete set, here's the one for you. Last but by no means least, we have Clay Fighter Sculptor's Cut, a Blockbuster exclusive title that I would about guarantee that you've heard of at least once, but I'll go into a little detail here just in case. So, Sculptor's Cut is essentially a finished, rounded off, completed version of a game I held near and dear growing up called Clay Fighter 63 1/3. Me and my friends played the piss out of this. Sculptor's Cut essentially added a few more characters, enhanced the gameplay, and basically made the game we knew and loved better in most ways. But we just had no way of knowing it existed. That was at least until we had a friend move in from out of town who tried to tip us off at a sleepover, but it didn't go his way.
Hey Josh, come on in, man. Thanks for inviting me to the sleepover, guys. What are y'all playing?
Yeah, it's Clay Fighter. It's the game of choice for the sleepover tonight. It's awesome.
Oh, Clay Fighter! I love this game. My favorite character is Lady Liberty.
What in the Sam are you talking about? There's no Lady Liberty in Clay Fighter.
No, dude, I swear to God, my favorite character is Lady Liberty.
Say that again and we'll kick your ass out of here so fast your head'll spin, man. Jeez.
My favorite character is Lady Liberty.
Now, of course, it would actually turn out that there was a character named Lady Liberty. We just had no earthly way of knowing that at the time. We had played the piss out of this version of the game, but there was another one out there that we just had no access to because of where we were born. It was kind of funny if you think about it. As a matter of fact, there was a few new characters we would eventually get to play, just way later in life. Nowadays, this game is extraordinarily sought after and it commands an extremely high price tag, sometimes approaching around $1,000 depending on when you look at it. So if you ever run into it, grab this thing up as fast as you can, especially if it's at a good deal. But if you need to complete your collection, pay up, it's worth it. And that is all 8 Blockbuster exclusive titles for the N64. And this is a pretty tall hurdle you have to jump if you're an N64 collector, so it's good to get intimate with them and know what you're up against. Well, that's all I've got to say for now related to the Blockbuster exclusive N64 titles, but I will leave you with this. If you do decide to chase those things down for your collection, may God have mercy on your soul, because it almost took me out, man. But for now, let's move on to number 3. Nintendo 64 system variants, one of my honest-to-God absolute favorite things about collecting for the N64. But real quick, what's a system variant? Well, just like the variants we talked about earlier, it is a change, big or small, made to the existing original Nintendo 64. Could be anything. Could be a color change, could be something different about the casing, whatever it may be. If it's a change, it probably qualifies it as a variant. And you may also be wondering, well, if it's a variant, why didn't I include it in the earlier section when we talked about rare variants? Well, the answer is pretty simple. Even though all these system variants are super cool, they're not exactly extremely rare. Although hard to find, although pretty expensive, not quite rare. So that's why I didn't really talk about them much there. And honestly, they deserve a section of their own, and that's what we're going to talk about right now. So it is not unusual at all for a current generation game system to get a little bit of a bump mid-run by its manufacturer. The PS4 did it with the PS4 Pro, the Xbox One did it with all of its countless versions of itself, and the Nintendo 64 did it, but in a slightly different way. Instead of getting a different system, we got what we call the expansion pack, which essentially doubled the amount of RAM the Nintendo 64 was capable of, and we could just pop the old one out and pop the new one in right there at home. A lot of us would get an expansion pack for free when we got Donkey Kong 64, or if you were like me, you had to rush out and buy one just to play Majora's Mask when it finally came out. There's no doubt about it. The Nintendo 64 was one of the best-selling, coolest items ever released. But just like anything else, eventually public interest would fade a little bit. However, when this happened, Nintendo wasn't exactly ready to just let their prize N64 ride off into the good night just yet. No, they wanted to come up with one more last-ditch effort to help breathe some new life back into this bad boy before its time on the shelf expired. So since Nintendo had already solved the big problem of how do we make the Nintendo 64 slightly more powerful mid-run thanks to the introduction of the expansion pack, the next big hurdle for them to jump was how do we make it feel fun again? How do we give it sex appeal? And they were able to pull this off in a big way thanks to the introduction of the Funtastic lineup.
64's 6 new colors are so amazing. Choosing a favorite might be somewhat of a struggle.
And honestly, this isn't the first time Nintendo has done such a thing. Even if we rewind back to the beginning, the original NES would eventually have the top loader variant come out for it, which was actually the better version of the NES. And then later, the Super Nintendo would do the same thing with the Mini 2 or the Super Nintendo Junior or whatever you want to call it. It's actually a pretty brilliant marketing move to help keep these systems alive a bit longer. So even though in this case Nintendo kept the actual shell of the N64 the exact same, every color that they pumped out would be another N64 variant that you as an N64 collector would eventually have to track down. So I'm going to give you a quick rundown of every one you're up against. But real quick, just to get it out of the way, we have the beautiful OG charcoal gray N64. Now this is a system that you've all probably played or possibly even owned at one time or another. It's the one that started everything. So all the beautiful variations that are to come has this one to thank. And of course it was paired with this beautiful partner in crime, the original gray N64 controller. Up first, we have the Jungle Green N64, which is the more common Funtastic that I run into from day to day, and I think that's because you could have actually got this one of two ways back in the day. You could have just bought it straight out as part of a Funtastic set, or you could have got it in the DK64 Jungle set, which also came with the Green N64 and a free expansion pack, which is really cool. Up next, we have the Watermelon Funtastic. Now, on the flip side to the Jungle Green, this one never comes up for me. As a matter of fact, this is the only one I've ever actually found locally in the wild, so I had to grab it and keep it. It's beautiful, and every time I see it, it makes my mouth water for a Watermelon Jolly Rancher, which must say something about the cosmetics. They did a really good job on it, and of course, the matching Watermelon controller doesn't hurt at all either. Up next is Smoke. Now, it's possible that you may feel that this one's kind of boring by comparison to the other Funtastic systems. I mean, it's not as vibrant as Watermelon or Jungle Green, but it's still pretty awesome in its own right, and I have a friend or two that actually prefer this over top of the really, really bright, colorful ones. Unfortunately, though, I can never find a good Smoke controller. Every time I find one in the wild, they're banged up with a bad stick. That might just be me, though. Up next, we have Grape, and this one is gorgeous, and you can lose yourself looking into this thing. It's like a jewel, just such a deep, dark bluish purple that it's entrancing, and a lot of people consider this to be their favorite one, and I have no problem seeing why they feel that way. Up next is Ice Blue, a very special Funtastic to me because it was the first Funtastic I ever saw growing up, which made me desperately want it. So even though I had a perfectly good gray N64 at home, I begged and begged to get this one, and I eventually finally did. Last but not least, with the Funtastic systems, we have Fire Orange. I mean, just look at this thing. I can't say enough about it because you can see why. It's just badassery at its finest. Anybody who sees this one falls in love with it, and it's not hard to see why. Now, don't get too excited just yet. That's the end of the Funtastics, but you still have two more North American N64 system variants to chase down, and they're both courtesy of Toys R Us. First up for the Toys R Us N64 exclusives would be the Gold N64. Now this one was released in both Japan and North America. It's got some off-gold buttons, and an interesting tidbit here, if you open the slot on the N64 Gold variant, the inside's actually green. So if you ever go to buy one of these and you see that, don't let it spook you. It's supposed to look that way. So now we have hands down the cutest Nintendo 64 to ever grace this planet with its existence, the Pikachu variant, or the Pokemon N64, or whatever you want to call it. It's got Pikachu on the front, and that's pretty awesome. Now, I said that this was a Toys R Us variant, and technically that's true, although it was released into other stores later, with different packaging, but we'll talk about that in a second. Plus, when you turn it on, its freaking cheeks light up. That's hard to beat. Now, this system is becoming increasingly difficult to chase down in the wild. I've actually only found 2 of these in my entire life of collecting, but when they pop up, I keep them. And now that we've talked about all those gorgeous system variants for the N64, let's move on to number 2. There is no doubt about it. Collecting all the North American Nintendo 64 system variants, it's a tall order. There is nothing easy about that. But collecting all the boxes those bastards came in, that is a whole nother level of boot to the balls difficult. Now, of course, the boxed system variants are not unique to the Nintendo 64. This is something Nintendo and really all companies have done forever. But if you go back to the original NES, that system has a ton of box system variants. I mean, they made the action set, the challenge set that came with Mario 3, the sports set. There was a whole bunch of them. And that was a way to just keep the system alive a little bit longer. I mean, heck, even GameCube got in on it, and they made multiple colors similar to the N64 in the way they did it. Super Nintendo also did it, but sometimes they would just slap a game sticker onto the front of the box to make it something new. But they also had had dedicated box variants too for like Donkey Kong when it came out for the Super Nintendo, so everybody's in on it. However, in my opinion, the Nintendo 64 shines because it has so many colorful, unique ones of its own. Let's take a look at some of the coolest box variants I know of for the Nintendo 64 systems, and then let's take a look at all the boxes I've managed to track down for my systems over the years. So this is the OG box variant that started it all for me. To be honest, it's not the exact one I opened on Christmas Day 1996, but this is actually a friend of mine's exact one that he opened on Christmas, so it still means a lot to me. This one is on my want list. I don't have it yet, but I'm chasing it. These are north of $300 if you can even find it, but it's so cool to see that the OG charcoal gray system box can be flared up so beautifully just by adding one of the super colorful controllers to it. And here's another box variant that I would give my good working testicle to get a hold of, but that probably isn't going to happen. These things are beautiful. It's a Toys R Us exclusive gold system, and as you can see, they are very expensive if you can even get a chance to buy one at all. Another example of using some color to flash up the original charcoal gray box. So with this one, we've got the gold. It's a Toys R Us exclusive. It makes my mouth water when I see it, and it still commands a pretty impressive price. Here we have the limited edition Star Wars Episode 1 Racer box variant. This one comes with the charcoal gray system and then the gray controller. I found this one at a yard sale for like 15 bucks and I was super happy about it. There's not a ton of detail on the box, but the characters still pop out pretty well. These usually go from $150 to around $350 depending on the condition. Here we have quite possibly the most gorgeous box ever released with a video game system ever, and that's the Pokemon Stadium Battle Set. Not to mention, it came with all kinds of cool extra stuff, like a Pokemon card and Pokemon Stadium. Even today, they command extremely high prices, so hopefully I can look into one someday. Earlier in the video, I mentioned that the Pikachu Nintendo 64 was a Toys R Us exclusive until it was later repackaged and sold at other retailers, and that's what we're going to talk about now. The Pikachu Nintendo 64 set that you're seeing on screen is the Toys R Us exclusive, and if you notice, it came with a few extra goodies, like a watch and a copy of Hey You Pikachu and a microphone. The Toys R Us exclusive complete box variant rarely comes up in its complete form in good condition, but when it does, it commands a pretty amazing price. Now this variant for the Pikachu N64 seems to be a little lesser known. I've talked to several people that don't realize that this wasn't just a Toys R Us exclusive after a while. At a certain point, it was sold at other stores, and this is proof. This one still has a tag on it from a different retailer other than Toys R Us, but I looked into this one for a smoking deal a couple of years ago and I was one happy camper. But as you can see, it is a gorgeous box and it also commands a pretty high price, but I highly doubt I'll ever sell the thing. Earlier I touched base on the fact that you could get the Jungle Green Nintendo 64 in either the Funtastic set or the Donkey Kong 64 set. Well, here is the Donkey Kong 64 set, and it is beautiful. And as you can see, it would have came with an expansion pack and a copy of Donkey Kong 64 back in the day. This thing is just awesome. So some of those boxes that we just went over are things that I would probably wet myself if I ever actually found out in the wild, but who knows, maybe it'll happen for me one of these days if I keep looking. What you're seeing on screen now are the box variants that I have been lucky enough to get my hands on. One way or another, be it through trades or just being in the right place at the right time or whatever the case. And I've only recently been able to complete my Funtastic set, and that was a true hurdle for me, and I'm super proud of it, and I hope to find many more box variants in the years to come. Now don't get me wrong, just because you do manage to track down and collect all of the North American Nintendo 64 system variants, it in no way, shape, or form means that you have to go out and collect all the boxes for those systems. It's just completely optional if you want to do that. I actually was not interested in doing that either until way later as a collector. I just woke up one day and decided that, hey, that might be fun, and that's what I did. It was extremely difficult, but in the end, extremely rewarding, and I'm glad I did it. And finally, it is time to talk about the number one reason why I feel collecting for the Nintendo 64 is a lot more complicated than others may give it credit for. But real quick, just a heads up, the number one spot is not going to be collecting all the North American games in their complete form. Okay, I understand. Put down the pitchforks and the lube. Of course, collecting all the North American titles in their complete forms is an extremely tall order, and it's extremely difficult, and only a few people will ever accomplish it. It's obvious, and that is exactly why it is not the number one spot on this list. This list is for the obscure things, the things that you might not know about, or others may not think about when it comes to collecting the N64. That's the whole point of this list. So yes, collecting all the games in their complete forms is a task just this side of climbing Mount Everest, but that's also why it's not on this list. So with that said, let's move on to number one. Yes, you read that correctly. The number one spot on this long list is controllers. And no, I'm not drunk. I actually have some receipts to back up exactly why I feel this way. Think about it. I've been collecting for the Nintendo 64 pretty much my entire life, and in all that time I have seen some amazing things. I have seen people complete the entire North American set, top to bottom, complete with box and manuals and everything to boot. I've seen people get all the system variants. I've seen some pretty awesome things, man, but you know what I've never seen? I have never seen or heard of a collector collecting all of the possible combinations of Nintendo 64 controllers, because that is one deep, scary, dark hole, and we're about to dive into it. So let me elaborate on what I mean by that real quick. When I say that I have never heard of in all this time a collector managing to track down and collect all the possible combinations of N64 controller variants in North America, I don't just mean someone managing to find one of each of all the possible N64 controller variants in North America. That's actually been done. But the world of N64 controller collecting is a big one, and your personal definition on what controller collecting means to you just depends on exactly how far you're willing to stretch the N64 controller collecting rubber band before it breaks. Me personally, I see that there are 3 possible levels when it comes to N64 controller collecting, so let's dive into what I mean by that real quick. First things first though, to help you fully understand exactly how much of a giant pain in the ass lifelong obsession N64 controller collecting could actually potentially turn out to be, we must first get acquainted with all the possible North American N64 controller variants that we will be looking for. So the first 3 controllers will be ones that we've already talked about earlier in this video, but first up we have the DK64 Banana controller. Next up we have the astronomically rare Millennium 2000 controller, probably the rarest controller on this list by far. Next we have the Nintendo Power 100. This is also an extremely rare one, so best of luck finding any of the last 3 controllers on your hunt to complete your set. From here on out, it'll be some of the more common controllers that you're probably familiar with, but next up we have the common gray controller that you've probably played with a million times, and then we move on to the fantastic controllers. We have Jungle Green, Grape, Ice Blue, Watermelon Red, Smoke, and Fire Orange. And although not a fantastic controller, we cannot forget the Gold controller from the Toys R Us exclusive Gold system. And of course, we must also mention the Pokemon controller that came with the Pikachu N64.
But we are not done yet.
Now, we of course can't forget the solid color controller lineup. We've already talked about gray, but we've got the solid green, black, red, blue, and yellow. Next up, we have the Atomic Purple, which most of us are familiar with thanks to the pack-in with the N64 system back in the day, so a lot of people know this controller all too well. And last but not least, we have the Toys R Us exclusive Extreme Green, which is a gorgeous, gorgeous controller. So, if you're keeping track at home, that is a grand total of 19 North American N64 controller variants. That is 19 controllers that you would have to track down and find, one each of, just to have a set of all the North American N64 controllers out there. And what you're seeing here is my lifelong journey towards that goal, and it is still incomplete. I currently do not have a Millennium 2000 controller or a Nintendo Power 100 controller. I hope to someday, but so far no luck. And with that said, finding and collecting one each of all 19 of these controllers is what I would personally call level 1 of N64 controller collecting. So, if level 1 is this hard, how crazy do you think level 2 is going to be? Well, let's find out. So now we're moving on to the point where super deep pockets and extreme patience will be the name of the game, because if level 1 is finding one each of all 19 North American controller variants, well then level 2 will be finding one each of all 19 North American controller variants in their complete form. And that is definitely not as easy as it sounds when it comes to these controllers. So here's the rub. Since there was so many different controllers released for the N64 over the years, this also meant that there was a lot of different types of packaging released for those controllers over the years too. Some cheaper and easier to find, others not so much. But if you want to complete level 2, you have to find one of each of these bastards to pull it off. First, let's take a look at the group of controllers which I would consider to be the easiest to track down in their complete form, and that would be the gray one, the green one, the yellow one, the red one, the blue one, the black one, the atomic purple one, and the extreme green one. All 8 of these controllers share the exact same type of packaging design, which is a really cool heavy-duty cardboard packaging which will hold up forever. These range in price from around $50 for a complete gray one, all the way up to around $500 plus for an extreme green one. They're not super hard to track down, but when you do, they're awesome for your collection.
Now here's where N64 complete controller collecting becomes an entirely different type of slippery bitch. Unlike the solid color controllers, the fantastic colored controllers did not come in a nice cardboard solid package that you could reuse. Nope, they came in a one-time use blister pack, which means once you open these things, the packaging was likely gone forever. So finding one of these in the complete form doesn't happen. You have to buy them in their sealed form, which can be very, very expensive. And that doesn't just go for the Fantastic controllers, that also includes the Gold controller Toys R Us exclusive as well. So if you decide to tackle level 2 and become an N64 controller collector in their complete form, prepare yourself because these are not only hard to find, but they're also extremely expensive. Just to give you an example of the type of pricing you can expect with this type of packaging, a recent sold listing has a Fantastic watermelon sealed in its blister pack going for $1,830 Canadian. That's pretty much right, if you're even able to find one. Currently, if you wanted to buy one yourself and you had the budget, your only real option, at least here on eBay, would be to go for this one for $956.25 USD, or this one for $3,495 USD. But if you didn't know this already, that's a ton of money, man. But that is of course to be expected if you're going this route as a collector, because this is expensive. At a quick glance, I was unable to find any recent sold listings for an orange Fantastic controller, but if you're in the market for one, eBay has a couple available for around $1,000 if you're looking. The grape Fantastic controllers in the same boat, running around $1,200 all the way up to $3,000 for the ones available on eBay. But unfortunately, I couldn't find any recent sold listings for a grape Fantastic at the moment. So from what I understand, the Smoke Fantastic controller in its sealed form didn't sell super well at retail, which makes it pretty damn rare nowadays. And that kind of jives from what I'm seeing, because not only could I not find a sold listing for one, I can't even find one for sale. So I'm guessing those are pretty dang hard to track down nowadays. I was able to find a couple of sealed Jungle Green though, but check this out. This one managed to sell for $305 even with this type of damage, and that tells you a whole lot about the desirability of this type of item. I would have been more than happy to have that, and I'm sure a lot of other people were too. And last but not least, when it comes to the sealed blister packs, we have the Toys R Us exclusive Gold controller. And I was able to find a couple of recent sold listings for these, and one recently sold for $989.64, and another one recently sold for nearly $700 USD, which is a lot of money, but man, when it comes to this kind of thing, passion outweighs the price, and I'm sure whoever ended up with these has them on a shelf, and they look at them with pride every night, because why wouldn't you? These things are just badass. And that does it for the Fantastics, the Gold, and the Solid Color N64 controllers. But as far as complete forms or sealed forms go, you're going to have to put an asterisk next to these next ones, because at least as far as I understand, the DK64 controller, the Nintendo Power 100, and the Millennium 2000 didn't actually come with any quote-unquote packaging. At best, they came in a plastic bag when you ordered them originally back in the day. With that said, however, I have seen a DK64 controller and a Millennium 2000 controllers with their cord wrapped in a plastic bag, which means, at least as far as I know, that this effectively is their new complete form. Looking into one of these controllers in this condition, however, is just off the charts rare, and it adds a significant amount to the price. The Millennium 2000 controller I saw at the time sold for almost $3,000, and the DK64 went for over $1,000. And it is my best assumption that this also applies to the Nintendo Power 100 controller and the Pokemon controller, which came with the Pikachu Edition N64. But in all my many years as a Nintendo 64 collector, I have never seen either of these controllers, be it in person or in pictures, in their complete form with their baggie or the plastic bag around their cord intact. But any of these last four controllers that I mentioned that you're lucky enough to find in a new lock state or in very good condition will work perfectly fine for your collection and for the sake of completing level 2 in my hypothetical example. Now I know this sounds absolutely impossible, but people have pulled this off, and I actually found a video of somebody that not only managed to do exactly what we just talked about, but he managed to do that very same thing with controllers in their complete form from all across the world. I will link the video in the description. Definitely check it out and give him your support. He deserves it. So at the beginning of this clip, I mentioned that controllers are something I have never heard of or seen anybody actually manage to track down and complete all of their possible combinations of, and I mean that. And if level 1 is finding all 19 controllers in their loose form, and level 2 is finding all 19 controllers in a complete or sealed form the best you can, then level 3 is exactly what I'm talking about. This is the peak of the mountain that no one that, as far as I know, has ever pulled it off. And that is, of course, doing exactly what we just talked about, finding all of these controllers in their complete form, except to be a true completist, you need 4 of these bastards, 4 Donkey Kong variants, 4 Millennium variants, and 4 of all the Fantastic variants. That is, like I said, one son of a bitchin' deep hole, ain't it? So where do I personally stand when it comes to collecting N64 controllers? Well, me, I do hope to eventually, someday, if I'm lucky, blow by the finish line of what I would call, for the sake of this video, level 1, which means I would collect one of each of these N64 North American controllers in their loose form, at least. But who knows, with a dash of persistence and a truckload of luck, maybe even one of these days I can pull off completing what I called level 2, which is getting one of each of these controllers in the complete or sealed form. I'm not going to hold my breath, but you never know. I've seen crazier things happen in all my years of collecting stuff. And like I said in the video, I have never personally heard of anybody getting 4 each of all 19 North American N64 controller variants out there, but if you have, please let me know in the comments. I would love to hear about that. That is one heck of an accomplishment. In the meantime though, I'll just be sure to pick up every single N64 controller that I'm lucky enough to happen across out in the wild. And who knows, one of these days I might find myself with 4 each of all 19 of these bastards. But that's a deep dark well that I refuse to jump in balls deep just yet, because that's the kind of obsession nightmares are made of. This is fantastic. Gold. 4 each. 4 each. 4 of each! And that is why I personally feel that Nintendo 64 controller collecting is a pit to hell so deep and dark that no collector will ever crawl out of it alive, thus making it hands down the most complicated aspect about Nintendo 64 collecting overall. 4 each. Thanks for watching, guys. Man, I have worked my balls off on this video over the last couple of months, so I would love to know what you guys thought about it down in the comment section. And if you liked it, maybe leave me a like. And if you like this kind of content, maybe even consider subscribing so I can see you guys in the next video. I'm going to do my absolute best to drop a video at least every couple of weeks or so from here on out, so I hope to see you on the next one. Thank you all very much, and don't forget to remember how awesome you really are.